My name is Mary Wilson. I'm a global partner lead for sustainability. So what that means is I support all of those organizations that are building on AWS for sustainability outcomes. So I look at the global system integrators to the startups and looking at how do we help support them as they enable them as they start to build out new products, but also then how do we support visibility of the outcomes that they're driving and ensure that our customers see those benefits, they understand exactly how they can apply them to their own business requirements. So get started here. Today I want to talk a little bit about the concepts, the key concepts that we're seeing, again, those trends, and where we see some prioritization from our own business, as well as what we're hearing from customers. This is a Chalk Talk. I'm open to hearing from you, especially here at the end. We'll save some time for questions for Q&A, but if there's some topics that are pressing for you that you feel like I missed, let's discuss them at the end, because I do want to make sure we're capturing all of your input. I think this is a very humbling topic, and we're all learning. This is a long-term programs that we're all installing, and the roadmaps are complex. And so I'm really looking at you as well for some feedback on how we're doing and where your priorities are. Talk a lot about data. Data has been a topic for a long time, but let's talk a little bit about how some of our sustainability initiatives, how we're leveraging data to get some of those outcomes and some of the other services at AWS, like machine learning, like IoT, artificial intelligence. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go through a call to action. Where do you see your own organizations growing and building towards some of these sustainability initiatives, and are you leveraging some of these data points as I'm calling out? Maybe do some thoughts there, as well as, again, some Q&A and discussion around that at the end. So we'll start with some of these key concepts, and I'm going to start pretty high level. Sustainability has become kind of an interchangeable word for a lot of different topics. So high-level sustainability is around building civilizations, building societies that are able to meet the present needs of societies without compromising the ability to meet those needs of future generations, right? And so these are several different topics. And what I want to call out today is the importance of looking across all of these initiatives. We are as a society right now, very focused on climate change, as we should be. But I also want to ensure that as we move forward on addressing climate change and building out solutions for climate change, that we're taking into consideration the social and the governance aspect of this. And that's why this topic of ESG is incredibly important, right? It's looking at what are the actions that your organizations are taking, that governments are taking, and how are they incorporating all of these different buckets, right, around social equity and human rights and labor rights as we use those tools and solutions to implement the impacts that we can make on climate change. So I ask you to consider that as you build out these roadmaps and think about how you yourselves are tracking ESG. And then, of course, there's the economy and the governance model of this, right? Like, we have to ensure that we continue to look at how our supply chains and our procurement practices are enabling social and environmental impact. So these drivers are increasing. We're hearing about this a lot. I think every time I turn on the TV, and maybe it's because I work in sustainability, I see it everywhere I turn. But customer demand is becoming really obvious. I think in North America, we're catching up to what our colleagues and friends over in EMEA and Europe and in other parts of the world are already seeing. But that customer demand and customer pressure is real. People are looking at the brands that they purchase more and more at how sustainable are they, and looking at those the reports that are coming from those industries and understanding more and more what that impact is and how their click and buy actually impacts climate and global emissions and other factors. Government regulations. They're in place in some parts of the world. They're coming. I think all of you, or many of you maybe have seen already, the SEC has made some guidelines. We will start seeing regulations come around how are you reporting on ESG measures. So that's a big factor right now, and I think it's also impacting a lot of organizations on how are they reporting and how does that look to their strategies and feed to their strategies. So we'll talk about that a little bit. People want to work for good companies. They want to work for companies that are thinking about social impact. So employee demand, especially now, we've all heard of this last year, a lot of people are moving organizations, they're changing roles, and they're considering their next employer, their own social impact there and how they can affect it. Impact investing, the financial services industry, building a lot of models around climate risk, around how organizations are looking at their future roadmaps and their product roadmaps for climate in particular, but for across ESG. And then sustainability is competitive positioning. This is an important one. I think I see it more probably in Europe than I have in North America right now. But we are seeing where organizations are looking at their RFP process, right? Their request for proposals and in their supply chains, and they're looking at the sustainability being a factor on who they choose, what vendors they go with. So this is something also to consider as we move forward. Those things are happening already. But the good news is that sustainability has been proven to drive growth. So these companies that are already looking at their digital transformation, they're looking at how to use technology and how it drives sustainability outcomes, are already outperforming their peers. I think we're going to see this 2.5x grow exponentially as climate in particular starts impacting how businesses and their supply chains are affected and impacted. So great news. By doubling down on these initiatives today, you're going to be able to address the previous slide as well as understand how it's going to affect your own business growth. So this is why today this is bigger than any one organization, of course. There's a lot of different stakeholders involved, and for each of us as individuals, each of us belonging to organizations, and hopefully some of you are responsible for sustainability in your organization and can create impact there. But we're seeing already where governments and the planning that they're doing around their own infrastructure and critical infrastructure in particular, where those investments are coming from, how it's affecting the supply chains and transportation, ethical consumer, all of these topics are not unique and are very dependent of each other. So what we're looking to do is how do we bring that kind of thought leadership that's happening in each of these industries within each of these organizations, and how do we build those collaboration models and impact greater and quicker on some of the roadmaps and how they affect and impact on each of these topics. Going to talk about greenhouse gas protocol because it's an important one. Again, I think we're all, perhaps our urgency is around climate change. So this is an important topic, and this is a 101 topic, but I won't get too far into scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and how reporting against those and acting against those has their own set of complexities under each scope. But know that at AWS, I represent the partner org. So my role is very much in looking across what our partners are doing and enabling them and supporting them in their innovation. And we see a lot of efforts going towards scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. My background actually is 15 years in the power and utility sector. So this is a bit of a sweet spot for me. It's my comfort zone, perhaps. But where we're starting to see this really interesting multi-sector dynamic is a great example that many of you can relate to, right? Electric vehicles, so e-mobility. Here is an opportunity where we need to look at considering how an auto manufacturer builds an electric vehicle. Where is the sourcing of all of those parts? Where do they come from? How are they reused, recycling materials? Once that car is built and it's actually now on the grid, it's very similar to the 50s, 1950s, where every home all of a sudden started installing air conditioners, right? This is a huge impact on the grid. It was unplanned. The electric utilities couldn't exactly define exactly where the next air conditioner was going to come up, which neighborhoods were suddenly going to fire up lots of air conditioners. Very similar kind of challenge today with electric vehicles. So as we bring on more electric vehicles, we have to consider the impact that it has on the grid. And that impact, of course, is at the same time that utilities are looking at the energy transition. How do we get off of some of the fossil fuels and the dirtier fuels and move to more green and renewable energy sources? So all of these kind of challenges and opportunities coming together today is definitely creating this multi-stakeholder opportunity, let's call it. But it's going to require a lot of multi-industry discussions and collaborations and understanding around how the impact is there and how do we help support and leverage the technology in order to address that. And with everyday people in their homes who are buying electric vehicles because they want to be greener. So, common direction. These are the 17 goals as defined by the United Nations. We have done a bit of studies on these and really focusing on where does technology create a bigger impact? Where do we feel as AWS and the cloud we can help support? And looking across each of these, right? Where do we have our own technologies? Where do we have our own subject matter expertise? Where we can start developing solutions and supporting customers and industry and governments and nations around these goals. So this is an important part and directional for us, is looking at how globally the United Nations is addressing this and how it impacts each of those topics. So digital transformation has been a buzzword for a long time. We've all been working hard at digital transformation for 10 plus years, maybe I'm aging myself. But the goal has been, for digital transformation for the last years has been, how do we start creating more insights, more customized insights for our customers? How do we start leveraging the data that's available to us in new ways? And that's been a really important part of what is now sustainability transformation. So now that we've got all of this data and all of these insights that we can create, how do we use that to lead to those sustainability outcomes? And that's where we are today. So digital transformation, we've been through it for the last decade or so, right? Generally, it takes months or years to do some of these projects. Sustainability, we're going to be looking at this for a long time. These roadmaps are long. Even if you've set net zero goals for 2030, those goals are going to continue to be refined. And net zero is very different than zero. So we're looking at how do we support long-term roadmaps, building in the future-proofing, and delivering those results today for the greatest impact, and understanding that we're going to have, this is a long road ahead, right? This is going to be iterated. It's going to be part of a continuous improvement process. So let's move to how AWS can help. And I'm going to talk about two different topics. The first one quite briefly, because I have colleagues that are presenting on this that I think can do a better job of it than I can, but sustainability of the cloud. So sustainability of the cloud, this is what AWS is doing very specifically for our own sustainability initiatives and how we support it through and with our customers. So this is some really smart people at AWS that are responsible for procuring energy. We are now the largest corporate procurer of renewable energy in the world. And so we look at how do we use that and leverage that across our data centers to help lower the carbon footprint of AWS customers, of those workloads running on AWS. But we also have really smart people that are working on water. We use water to cool our data centers. So how do we work with the local water utilities to ensure that we are net zero water consumption? So these are some interesting projects, a lot of thought leadership happening there where water, I think, is incredibly important and probably not valued as it should be. So I'm excited to see what AWS is doing there around some of the thought leadership that we have. But we also have the well-architected pillar of well-architected framework with the sustainability pillar. So this is looking at how are you as an AWS customer leveraging our compute and storage in the most sustainable way. So looking across at how are you architecting? Are you considering sustainability as part of your architecture of your own IT workloads? So a lot of brain power went into that, building that out. We've got solution architects around the world who have been trained on this now and who are looking at working with customers and understanding how we can lower the consumption of lower the emissions of your IT workloads and ensure that you still get the business requirements met. And I'll talk about the ASDI a bit more detailed, but it is definitely something of the cloud, right? This is something that we provide for free to help do some climate modeling and build out some sustainability models. But what I want to talk about is through the cloud. So these are those solutions, again, that are built on AWS that help further an organization's sustainability goals outside of IT workloads. So this is looking across operations, this is looking across buildings and energy management, and how are you leveraging sustainability throughout your supply chains. So let's talk about that a little bit. A lot of the challenges that we're hearing from customers right now are really, again, primarily focused on climate. That's where a lot of the regulations are coming from. That's where a lot of the initial goals are. So how do I start identifying this? Where do I start? Understanding exactly where I am today and building out that reporting and the tools is the first step, right? Because once we identify exactly where we are, now we can start taking action on that. And we can start reporting on that action to our customers, to our employees, to the regulators. So this is the step. This is the first step, and that's why I think this is so important today, is to understand where you are in your journey and how can AWS support. Step one, if you haven't done this yet, is building out those tools to start leveraging the data, building out the insights, and building out those reports. Those reports will help you create not just that baseline, but also start with your strategy on where can you create that impact. But then once you've got your own house in order, so to speak, how do you start innovating faster? Again, long-term roadmaps, right? And then how do we start collaborating with others? How do we ensure that the widgets that we use in our products also are sustainable, that I can show the sustainability throughout my entire value chain? So the areas of focus, I mentioned, kind of where AWS is doubling down this year, where we feel like there's a great opportunity for impact right now. Decarbonization, water conservation. We've got a lot of initiatives right now through social responsibility, and then circular economy. I think these are kind of the four big buckets, 4 pillars that we're focusing on for this year. I'll be curious from you if these are also where you see your own organizations focused on. But this is where we feel like we can create the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time. And we've got our partners, again, kind of where my focus is, I should say, who are building out these types of solutions. And this is where we see a lot of the enablement happening today. So the first step is getting your baseline reporting. Your next step is what are the use cases that you're going to focus on? Where do you as an organization, where can you create the biggest impact? And we've got tools. We've got lots of use cases. Here are 4 examples. I think we've got 34 or 35 that we've prioritized for this year. These are 4. And what I want to talk about, what I want to kind of point out here is that these use cases are cross-industry, cross-sector, and they are also industry specific. So we're understanding that sustainability has some very common use cases, some common technologies that can be applied for those outcomes. But we also realize that every industry has its unique aspects and unique goals, as well as obviously every organization. So how do we bring in these use cases, bring in the technology expertise that's going to help support, whether that's through blockchain, artificial intelligence, or IoT, but also then bring in industry expertise so that we ensure that we're addressing the big blocks of an industry. So what I've done here is I've created a taxonomy, and my intent was to pull away from industry-specific use cases, right? I really want to start looking at how do we start building collaboration models that are across different industries where they have similar outcomes they're looking to drive. I want to learn from manufacturing and take that to media and entertainment, right? I want to pull those use cases that are applicable and start looking at them differently. Start looking at how do we start kind of untangling and having something kind of hidden away in one very specific industry. And now let's pull it out and let's take a look at where else that might apply. Where are there lessons learned? Where is the technology applicable with just maybe some different tweaks, maybe a different use case, but we're not starting from zero, right? We've got a lot of really good technologies and use cases and experience that's already been in place for a long time. You can see my social and governance. I'm still building that out. This first exercise was around what we're hearing from customers, and that's around climate. So I'm going to go back and repeat. I see a huge importance and a lack, even in my own work, and where I'm struggling to double down in the next few weeks to build that out. And how are those interlocking as well? How is the environmental piece connected to social and governance? And how do we start addressing them holistically? So taking that taxonomy, let's take a look also at the degrees of impact. So this goes back to you have to start somewhere, right? And the first step is really looking at, and here's where AWS can help. The first step is in that sustainable cloud. So if you haven't already talked to somebody at AWS around your AWS workloads and how you're using and leveraging AWS for technology, let's go do that today, right? Let's get the account managers, let's get the solution architects queued up so that they can start walking through what that sustainability pillar looks like. Modernization is also a big piece of this, right? If you've considered how you have modernized your architecture, then you're already steps ahead. If you're leveraging Graviton or serverless, for example, these are great opportunities to lower your carbon emissions. But then we start getting into, again, the measuring and reporting. Now you're building out this baseline. You're starting to get an understanding of where you have some opportunities to create impact, where maybe you have some gaps in your knowledge and into your insights. From there, now we can start creating bigger impact. So measurement and reporting for me is where we create the first big steps. So I'm hoping that you're not doing it in Excel. I'm hoping that this is something that that you're looking at AWS and our partners and how can we help you in building out what you should be tracking, how you should track it, and how it can play into kind of two different topics. Maybe I will use my chalk talk. I'll use my board here for a second. Because I feel like there's two different opportunities here on the measurement and reporting. There's probably a faster way to do this. But if you're looking at kind of your ability to influence, right? This is with your stakeholders, this is with your customers, this is with your value chain, and then the impact, right? When you're doing reporting's probably going to ask you for, these 2 or 3 topics, and you're going to build out really strong reporting process there. But your ability to influence on them is going to potentially look different than how the government or regulators are going to want you to report against. So how do you take this, what the reporting stats are, and build them so that you can actually take action that brings the impact up and over, right? So having that strategy and having the opportunity to find where I don't want to say low-hanging fruit because that makes it sound too easy, but understanding exactly where your level of effort is going and how it's going to create the greatest impact is your first step. And from that process, you can spend the next 2 years or 5 years on doubling down on that. And in the meantime, we're iterating and we're building out new projects and we're understanding more and more where your impact could be driven. So that's why having the reporting and the measurement in the first place is going to be so important. And that's why having it already built in a system that is shareable, a system that you can actually leverage across your supply chains, your value chains, you can use it for reporting. This is why Excel spreadsheets, I think, are going to be difficult for creating that kind of impact going forward. So sustainability through the cloud. First step is transforming, right? So we want to give you access. We want to have you leveraging all of that data. The partner network is the first place I go. I think there's a lot of great innovation that's happening within our partner network. I can talk a little bit more about that. But I'm also going to tell you a little bit more about Data Exchange, the AWS Data Exchange. AWS Marketplace is another opportunity for collecting some data outside of your own initiatives. The Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative. Our ProServe team, our professional services team, also has a sustainability practice in which they're growing out every day more and more knowledge, more and more projects that they're doing with customers. And then there's the AWS Digital Innovation and Co-Development teams. So if you haven't seen, perhaps this morning in our keynote, we talked a lot about culture of innovation. So we do have programs and workshops and opportunities. I talk about where can you create this biggest impact. We have teams that can help you find that first steps. Where can we take a look across our businesses, and let's brainstorm, let's get creative, let's think a little bit about if we were to take certain actions, what are the implications of that going forward? And this digital innovation team can start pulling in resources from your industry, from different technologies, and start showing you and building together with you what those roadmaps might look like. So I encourage using those teams. But the first step is data. So if you've gone through digital transformation, you've already had this experience where suddenly you're getting data from new sources. It's being used differently by different people. So having access, visibility, different types of reporting models. This is all stuff that is part of digital transformation, but also now key to sustainability transformation. So being able to pull that data, take it in for different types of applications. We look at the different types of projects that you could potentially be running. They're going to be looking at that data differently. So this is going to be a very important piece of it. And IoT, taking all of those connected devices, bringing it in, and being able to sort it, being able to build intelligence and insights out of it is going to be a critical piece of building out those roadmaps. Other avenues of pulling in data. So you've got your own data through your own devices. But AWS and Amazon, we also have other opportunities to pull in and take a look at openly sourced data, as well as some paid data that you could use for your own planning and modeling purposes. So right now we've got some great familiar names, I think, for a lot of people, that can help with things like if you need to do some modeling around weather forecast or around what's happening for environmental indicators. We've seen, for example, if an organization is looking to build a solar farm, well, they want to make sure that where they build that solar farm isn't going to be washed away. I live in Florida, isn't going to be washed away in the next 5, 10, 20 years. So doing those climate models are very important for real estate, for many different types of organizations and projects. So this type of data, this is the AWS Data Exchange, this is the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative. It's really important to take a look at how can you leverage data from other sources, and potentially, because you yourselves are collecting so much data, is this an opportunity for you to publish data, create a revenue model out of that data, or also contribute to more industry knowledge? So I encourage taking a look at that for various purposes. But we can also help support if you're looking to build, right? So we're happy to support, take a look at how can we leverage together, maybe with our ProServe teams, maybe within our own technology teams, if you have your own teams who have this kind of subject matter expertise. How do we take and leverage all of these different data sources that you yourself are collecting, as well as what's available on AWS? And then how do we process all of that data? How do we build insights out of that data? Let's build out some new models that create some scoring and reporting for you, as well as now let's start building out what those roadmaps might be, where you might be able to create that greatest impact. And let's start looking at other tools, other technologies. Is it blockchain? Because now you need to have understanding of exactly what where your vendors are sourcing different supplies, so you need blockchain to help track all of that? Or is it more IoT because now you want to track and see more, get more visibility to some other far reaches part of your own supply chains? So these are the types of activities that we can do and support and encourage. So I mentioned earlier that we have these technology teams that can help support. We also have the industry teams. So our partners as well have industry teams. So between what AWS can offer, between our partners, we're really looking at what are the sustainability use cases as it relates to an industry? What is the unique factors and applications of sustainability within those industries? So my role is also to take a look across, again, you saw that where I'm pulling out away from the industry so that we can look at those commonalities and where those use cases could potentially apply to multiple industries. Here's where we then reapply them. So we say some of the use cases that are relevant for manufacturing are also relevant for construction. How do we now bring those partners, bring those solutions, bring that experience together to share knowledge, to fast track on some of these sustainability initiatives? And where some of our partners, where I'm seeing them coming through now, we are seeing a lot of this reporting and disclosure. I think having the government regulations coming through means that having a validated, accredited, certifiable report is going to be more and more necessary. So we've got to start creating some common language. We have to start creating some common scoring. And so there's some efforts that, and some of them are already off the ground. So I'm curious to see where those go. But that's a big part of it. But also looking at how do we start building out in your own operations and products, how do we build that sustainability, those different initiatives there, but the industry disruption that I talked about earlier, where we have cross-industry, cross-sector, this is where some of our partners also have some expertise to support and understand where the sustainability initiatives are driving from. So the innovation, I think, is where sustainability right now, I've seen some articles that say anywhere from 70 to 80% of the technology solutions that will address sustainability are already out there. They already exist. So we just have to learn how to use them better. We have to learn how to apply them for sustainability outcomes. IoT, I think, is a front runner there. IoT and how are we leveraging IoT to pull that kind of data is exactly how we're going to start creating more of that impact. So building out that innovation. Here's a couple of customers who have done some interesting things. Now, I mentioned I come from the power and utility sector. So Mueller is a company I've worked with for many years. And leak detection, I don't know how many of you are aware of how much water we actually lose in our pipes, in our infrastructure. The infrastructure in most cities is 50 years old. In some places, it's 75, even 100 years old. So having an understanding of where you can go and correct some of these leaks is a #1 priority for many cities. And water is a very precious resource. So learning how to start building out models, collecting that data so that we can go and act quickly and smartly, intelligently on where those leaks are happening is huge sustainability initiative, a huge opportunity to manage water better. So this is something that Mueller has done with AWS and looking at, how can we ensure that not only we know where we have water leakage, but also we know what's happening with the contents of the water, whether it's clean or not, and it needs to make sure that it's being managed well. So here in this case, they could have had a potential millions of dollars of fines because of the discharge of some water into protected waterways. And again, I live in Florida, so I'm familiar with these kinds of use cases, and this is becoming more and more important as we understand how human activities, and particularly with water, are affecting our protected waterways. So another water story is, to kind of stay on the same theme for a moment, But we're working also with charity organizations and NGOs as they look at, how can they monitor the health of water pumps that maybe are in hard to reach places and maybe are spread across wide terrains. So another important way to understand not only how that water is affecting communities and ensuring that they have access to clean water, but also I've worked in the utility industry, so a truck roll is very expensive. I imagine it's even more so when you're looking at Africa, right? You have to go and actually do work on a water pump. That's an expensive endeavor, just sending somebody there. So understanding how water pumps are working and how they are impacting is an important part of keeping them running and as well as understanding exactly how you can keep them up to date and keep them repaired and keep them working well. Okay. So Tiber, energy consumption is an important part, I think, here in the U.S. in particular. There have been several efforts in how do we make people more aware in their homes and in their businesses on how they use energy and how they could be more efficient. So leveraging IoT, getting real-time energy data will help people in their homes and in their businesses understand what is my effect on the energy grid and how can I lower my consumption in small ways that affect peak periods. So when there's a peak period, that means that the energy provider will have to potentially fire up another coal-powered plant or buy it off of the grid in a very expensive way. So always looking at how to manage and reduce costs here is an important piece of energy efficiency and energy consumption demand response programs. Customers are also very happy with this because it means that they have a lower bill. So this kind of data and how you use it to interact with people in their homes will lead to the other stories that I talked about earlier around EVs. So if we've gained customer trust in energy, they're going to allow us to do things like charge their EV when there's more energy on the grid, when there's more green energy on the grid even. So these are the types of activities that have been happening now and in the recent past that lead to that consumer trust and the ability to leverage technology better for these sustainability outcomes. Here's a funner one. I did not particularly participate in this one myself, but apparently you can track beer usage and reduce waste in a bar in Tel Aviv. So $3,000 in a month is a lot, I guess, if you're a local bar. So, and it's a great opportunity to say, if we were to do this in every bar around the world, how much beer would we save? And that's a lot of fun. But it also goes back to water, right? Water is being used to produce beer, so if we're not wasting it, then even better, and a big driver for the sustainability outcomes. So, call to action. And this is probably more questions, so we can open it up a little bit early here, but thinking about your own industry, your own organizations, how can you accelerate that sustainability transformation? Where are you on a maturity scale already? Is this something that you've already started to build out models for reporting? Are you already doing some initiatives around your supply chain? Or possibly in your buildings and you're looking at energy efficiency and energy management differently? So I'm curious, looking at your existing business practices, are you looking today at how you can incorporate sustainability initiatives throughout in your current business practices? So, got a lot of additional resources for you. 2030 is just around the corner. Talk about how this impact is going to happen, right? And where you can create the biggest impact today. These roadmaps are long, and 2030, 2050, these are all long-term goals. So I'm really curious, how are you looking at sustainability today in your organizations? And do you feel the pressures from governments or from your customers, or are you feeling it from something like climate change initiatives? So I'm going to open it up for Q&A a little bit early. I think I spoke a little fast, so hopefully it wasn't too fast. Give you guys a chance to ask any questions or anything else that you wanted me to double down on and talk about more. Yes, sir.
You have brought up essentially the pressure for near term. Things are going to take a long time to execute, but there's a lot of pressure just to do things near term, to do something, because we or whoever can't track 30 years of progress or 20 years of progress on something. What are you guys doing is it with blockchain or smart contracts to kind of hold goals and targets accountable and gates and being able to look in the past and seeing the provenance of like, all right, this beget this beget this? Do you have anything for that?
Yeah. So the question is about looking at long-term plans and long-term goals, and how do we create and measure the impact in the short term, and what are the tools available to help do that? Do I understand? Yeah.
Yeah, to make companies comfortable reporting on that type of thing.
Right.
Versus like it being a scramble every quarter or every year. We've got to scramble to make all these reporting frameworks.
Yeah, so the short term on the reporting frameworks. Yeah, so I come from the partner org, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what our partners are doing and how AWS is supporting that. I think the challenge today, I think you've hit on a very good point. The challenge today is that there hasn't been a standardization yet. We're not seeing that yet from regulators, and we know that the regulators are going to be asking for very specific topics, but there hasn't been a standard template, so to speak, on what are those reporting metrics and what are the requirements on improvement, and who is going to go and audit those. So I agree with you. There's a lot of questions around how do we. I don't want to wait 10 years. I don't want to wait 30 years to see the impact of the sustainability work that we did today. So
just to know that what I'm doing has a big impact in 10 years, but had some impact now,
today.
Right? Are you working with SASB, like doing COP26, COP27, as far as, are you integrating that into AWS so that we can?
Yeah, we're looking at several different plans. So many of the states in the United States, for example, have their own goals. There's also a European Union referendum that has a lot of monies attached to it, funding to help support each individual country as they build out their plans. The UK has one separately as well. And so what I'm starting to see is it's almost by country or state by state versus organizationally today, where there are these initiatives to say, what are your plans and how can we enable them, through funding? But the reporting of them and showing the impact of them hasn't been structured. I haven't seen that yet. But we are looking at how do we bring in those regulations. So I have a couple of partners that come to mind immediately that are pulling in what are the requirements as they come in from different government agencies, and how do we build the reporting and what we track against those. So it's a lot of AI to start pulling out what are those factors that are being tracked, what are the commonalities across a country, like every state in the United States, do they have similar things that they're looking for reporting on? Is that similar or different than what Australia is doing? And how do we start building some models that will encapsulate so that we don't have siloed types of reporting. And when supply chains are global, as they are in most organizations, how do we ensure that what the data that we're sharing is actually valid and accredited, and we're reading the same points and building on the same ones? So there's a lot of work to be done. It's a great question because there's not a good answer that I've seen yet.
Can you just move back one slide before the resource slide?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
That was it. That was an easy one. Yeah.
So I run a small startup.
Cool.
Small e-commerce startup, and a lot of the suppliers that buy products that my customers then sell on our platform are going through this corporate ESG initiative, thankfully, and it's just kind of just now starting, and it's a big deal in our industry because we make branded merchandise like trinkets and stuff that sometimes ends up in landfill. I digress. What is sharing what their impact is.
Mhm.
Because they seem a little hesitant.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. And there are teams within Amazon.com that might be better suited to answer this from their specific experience, and I'm happy to connect you there. But what I've seen from that perspective is, I don't know if you've seen our Climate Pledge Friendly badge that we have. And we are looking at having probably being a bit of a leader on this, on tracking and validating that when a seller says that their products have sustainability throughout the value chain, that there's actually a proof points that can be tracked. And so we have teams who do that. But you ask about how do we help them get there? How do we help them feel comfortable about reporting against those, especially if it doesn't look good initially and there's work to be done, is what I'm hearing, yeah.
Well, when, a supplier goes through the initiative to create a more sustainable product, and they're going down to their manufacturers and saying, we need to use different resources to make this product more expensive, ultimately the consumer's paying more.
Yeah.
In a B2B scenario where there's a lot of commerce going around and probably where we can make a quicker impact, you have to have those distributors that are selling those products select the green product over the
Yep.
less expensive product that people are used to. So that's kind of where
Yeah.
we are, is encouraging them to select the green product to support the suppliers that are going through this initiative. So
Yep.
yeah, so
Yeah. So what I'm seeing is that there's modeling that's happening through some of the partners where they're showing what the future carbon tax will look like versus what you're paying today for a product. So having an understanding of the carbon footprint and how it impacts your own carbon tax, you may decide that you'd rather spend 2 cents more on a product because it saves you 3 cents on the carbon tax. So I think those kinds of dynamics are going to become more obvious in the future. But today, I think we're still at that chicken egg, right? Is where do we have the carrot? Where do we have the stick? And I think the regulators are coming up with sticks. The opportunity for the carrot is in the consumers and in the way that we talk with consumers, the way that we show them the benefits of spending a little bit more money but creating something that's more sustainable. And we see it already happening in the travel and hospitality industry, for example, right? Where people are, I'll pay a little extra for my flight because it's going to balance my carbon emissions, a little bit extra. So I think it's coming. I'm optimistic that it's coming. But I think also the regulations and what's happening there and the carbon taxes will help push that along much faster.
so once people collect all this data about their impact, are they prone to share it with people that, like you were saying, you work with partners or like startups and stuff?
Yep.
This is the problems and challenges that we're going to need to solve because this is where we are. Or are you seeing them more have the conversations along like we need to decrease X, Y, Z, not like this is where we are?
Yeah, so around where we are today versus where we can impact and decrease and improve visibility and transparency, I think is the question, right? It's about how do we, it's difficult to create impact and pressures if you don't know where your starting point is. And so I think that's where a lot of us are today, right? Is we're still building out what are the tools to measure and report and who's responsible for that and how is that then shared across your supply chain. So agreed, we're not moving fast enough, I think is also what I'm hearing from you. You're in a startup and I'm excited to learn more about what you're up to. I think there's a lot of innovation happening with our startups and a lot of opportunity to start building those kinds of models today. But how do we start building the impact through those organizations that don't feel like they've got their own reporting in-house ready, as well as then starting to share it more broadly and how it might impact their own business and vendors and suppliers and how they work. So agreed. I don't think there's a great answer today, but I do know there are organizations working towards it. Yeah, be curious to hear how you are. And we have a team at AWS that I work closely with that is working in retail and working in ethical commerce, and I think it might be interesting to connect you. Mm-hmm.
I had a question regarding
Yeah.
IoT. I think you mentioned IoT as one of your main enablers for
Yes.
sustainability. So what are some of the major levers that you see that make the most impact in regards to IoT, maybe building, transportation, or energy? Like, where do you see the biggest levers?
Yeah. So I don't know if you had a chance to sit in earlier today. One of my colleagues talked with the school district here in Georgia around building management. So here's a very probably ubiquitous in most industries have real estate and have buildings. So when you look at IoT, this is a great opportunity to start looking at not only how you're using IoT to collect data about your building and the energy that it's consuming, but then also how do you leverage that same data for other use cases? So they talked a bit about the safety of their schools and understanding what's happening within each of the classrooms and how they can use it for not only energy management, but also understanding the quality of air and for the children and the students and the teachers and the staff that are all there. So I think there's an opportunity with IoT and the collection of data to look at it for sustainability outcomes. But sustainability, again, is a very broad topic. And sustainability means creating safe and sustainable spaces as well. So that's one example that I heard today. Another one I heard yesterday, is out of our Singapore team, in which they're looking at smart cities, and this is in our public sector. So smart cities, smart and sustainable cities. So how are we looking at IoT across a city and across a city's infrastructure to start building out more sustainability there, along with the citizen services that come with the social aspect of it. So again, having more of that data and the sensors across a building or a city or an infrastructure are going to give us more insight so that we can start acting smarter, acting more intelligently around where we can create the biggest impact, where can we leverage IoT for, I talked about water, but it's also good for when we look at, I had a use case example out of Australia where we had rigs that are thousands of miles off the coast, and how do you maintain visuals on an oil pump? It's through IoT, right? It's going to send you an image every minute of what's exactly happening on an oil pump, so that nothing gets, so that it always has oil in that pump, so that nothing gets burned up, so that we don't have problems with that oil rig. But then it's also about sending somebody all the way over there. That's not very sustainable either for their own time, and again, kind of a truck roll, but even bigger, I think, when you're looking at hundreds or thousands of miles offshore. So all of these lead to sustainability outcomes. And IoT is the way to collect that data, to create the insights so that we can start building models with that data. We can start building machine learning insights with that data. So I think IoT and the collection of data across your organizations and across your physical assets is a critical piece of that. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I should repeat it.
Storing images from IoT devices, right?
Yeah.
That in itself, I'm starting to think, images are large. You're starting to have a bunch of storage that you're now starting to eat up electricity.
Yep.
What are you guys thinking about that aspect of it when you start to talk about the enormous amount of data you have to store?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's part of the well-architected pillar. So it's about, the question was, how are we architecting well for all of these large image files or the amount of data that we're receiving through the IoT. So I think this is where AI starts to help as well, because when you look at those images in that example that I just gave of the oil rig and the oil pumps, it's very similar to the water pumps I talked about, right? When you look at the image that's coming from there, artificial intelligence can say, does it look normal or not, and then immediately delete that file. right? So quickly being able to react to an image is also a key piece of this. So that's part of it. The other part of it is through that well-architected pillar. So it's saying, okay, what do I need to store forever? And is it okay if it's sitting in Glacier, if it's sitting in some system that I have access to should I need it? Or is it something that I need to have access to on a regular basis so that you might want to have an image that says this is what normal looks like forever and ever. But just that every minute or every 5 minutes of capturing that image, that can be deleted or it can be put in Glacier for future reference, right? So that's all about looking at how you're leveraging compute and storage in a sustainable way, and you're making conscious decisions around how you're using it. Yeah, thanks for the question. Good. We are coming close to time. One more question. Anybody have another question? The most interesting sustainability project. Interesting is a fun word. It covers all kinds of topics. So I spoke yesterday with the startup. And so I'm in a really cool role because I get to sit across what our global system integrators and our large customers are doing, as well as where I see the ISVs and the innovation that's happening there and how they're re-emerging some of the solutions they built 100 years ago in some cases, and now looking at them in new ways for sustainability outcomes. And then I also get the fun pleasure of working with startups. And I think some of the interesting work right now is in that how do we create a better model for sharing of data, and how do we ensure that that there is a validation around it, that there is I don't know if I'm going to answer your question exactly, but I think it gives you an opportunity to start looking at technology as well as new use cases in a different way. So when you look at supply chains and how ships cross the planet and what is their carbon footprint and where should you look at sourcing local versus global, and to your point earlier around the carbon tax and how that might impact where we start looking for goods. So this is where it starts to get fun, right? This is where you start rolling up your sleeves and saying, this is hard. This is really hard. And the use cases aren't obvious either. And so it's not just about the carbon footprint of those goods, but who actually pulled that resource out of the ground. And being able to track to that kind of level is fascinating. And you start thinking and looking at the things around you very differently, don't you? But there's a lot of fun use cases. I highly recommend that you take a look at our website. We have a sustainability report of our own from Amazon. I think this is the 4th year that we've published that. So great data points in there around what Amazon is doing, as well as some fun use cases that they've been working on and focused on. If you're looking at the sustainability, the well-architected pillar, which I highly recommend everybody does. There's also a link for that. Climate Next docuseries. This is a really fun project that we did with Werner Vogels, who is AWS's CTO, and he's highlighting some of the startups as well as some of the larger sustainability projects that we've been invested in and working with across the world. So I think there's really cool stories. They all run about 10 minutes long, and really interesting stories around sustainability and different use cases. The mangroves or waste management and things that we don't always think about how it impacts. Another project I would point out in the last 30 seconds is the Climate Pledge. I was just in Miami last week. The Climate Pledge announced a collaboration with National Geographic, in which we are hosting and sponsoring climate series and climate expertise and journalism and storytelling from several different, I think it's 5 different recipients, maybe it's 6 recipients of funding. Different experts around the world who are capturing and telling stories of climate change or sustainability in their communities. So you've got people from Patagonia and people in Madagascar. So it's really interesting, and I highly recommend taking a look at that. And then We do have some free training that's out there if you weren't aware already, or if your teams are looking to get more knowledge around AWS. A lot of digital course of 500 plus, it looks like. So digital courses, and there's a path. So you can say, I'm a business person or I'm a technical person. You can go in and get some paths around what might most interest you around learning around AWS and all of the different technologies we provide. But then also, if you're looking at getting that certification, or if you have teams on your teams that are looking for the certifications, this is a great chance to have an employee benefit, is to offer them some of these certifications through AWS and some of that free training. This is where you can find me, Mary WN at Amazon, but I'm also on Twitter, Talk to Mary. And I ask that you please complete the survey on your way out. So thanks again for your time. Appreciate the collaboration, appreciate the feedback. Thanks so much.